oratorio Considering Matthew Shepard, which will be performed this evening at the high school in their brand new auditorium, which is a really sort of wonderful musical place to be. So there are tickets available, I think. So if you, I think just a couple though. So if you're interested, please get some. Matthew Shepard's death was not just Laramie's tragedy. At the time, it resonated across the United States. It served as a symbol not just of the gay rights movement, but it became a touch point for equal treatment of all Americans. The nation mourned and tried to make sense of it, and art served as an important lens through which that took place, beginning with the Laramie Project and then on to books, documentaries, and other kinds of productions. But what does it mean today, after nearly 2 decades of reflection and reaction, after all the national debates concerning the rights of America's people and the events that have impacted them? Here again, art has taken the lead. In 2016, the nation's most accomplished touring choir, Conspirare, debuted a 3-part oratorio called Considering Matthew Shepard, composed by Craig Hella-Johnson with the libretto by Michael Dennis Browne. The work has already received a Grammy nomination for its insight and message of hope. Conspirare will perform the oratorio tonight in a free concert, as I've mentioned. For our last session this morning, welcome Craig Hella-Johnson, Michael Dennis Browne, and Charles Wesley Evans of Conspirare, as well as Jason Marsden of the Matthew Shepard Foundation, who will talk about Matthew's legacy and their experience with this profound musical piece. The panel will be moderated by UW professor Nicole Lamartine, who directs many UW choirs, and I will let her introduce the speakers more fully. Professor Lamartine.
A big thank you to everyone for being here to share this conversation this morning. My name is Nicole Lamartine, and I'm Director of Choral Activities here at UW. This is my 11th year, and in the 10 years since coming here, at the 10th anniversary of Matthew Shepard's murder, I've seen a great deal of change. And I've seen a group of students who are so much more aware and compassionate and accepting. And I think that's a true marker of how we've been able to change. One way that we have experienced this change is through an artistic output. And so I'd like to have a conversation today about Considering Matthew Shepard. This new piece, relatively new, composed by Craig Hella-Johnson, which asks us to be open to hearing a story, open to consider what that story means, and how we can take a tragic event and move forward as better human beings towards each other. With me today, we have Conspirare artist Charles Wesley Evans, who in the oratorio sings As the Fence, carrying and holding Matt through the night. To his left, we have composer and conductor of Conspirare, Craig Hella-Johnson, who I describe as being a conduit through which the universe speaks. To Craig's left, we have Jason Marsden, Executive Director of the Matthew Shepard Foundation. He has been instrumental in helping to promote this work and to publicly allow it to percolate and be an agent for change. To Jason's left, we have librettist Michael Dennis Browne, who has collaborated with Craig throughout the genesis of this project in terms of the text for which the music is written. I want to tell you that this piece, Considering Matthew Shepard, is one of the most impactful pieces I've ever experienced as a musician. And last night, I had a few of my students at the dress rehearsal, and afterwards, they couldn't move from their seats. They were riveted for about 27 minutes. And I've never seen such groundedness, such insight, such thoughtfulness in these students. And that is a testament to what this piece of music can do to change lives. The Washington Post says, Considering Matthew Shepard demonstrates music's capacity to encompass, transform, and transcend tragedy. Powerfully cathartic, it leads us from horror and grief to a higher understanding of the human condition, enabling us to endure. The impact of this piece of music cannot be understated. So we've heard accounts this morning from various people who were here at the time, 20 years ago, and how we've changed and how we've moved forward. Considering Matthew Shepard provides an artistic opportunity for reflection, growth, and change. So to begin our discussion this morning, why is it important for each of you to be here in Laramie, Wyoming on the 20th year to the day of Matt's abduction and beating? Craig, let's start with you.
Everyone took in a breath. Like, you go. Are these holdable? Yeah, good. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you here, and good morning, everybody. Good late morning, I mean. I do want to say, just before, because it feels important to my heart too, just because we have an extraordinary collaborator, Michael Dennis Browne, with me here, who will speak in a bit. But I also want to reference immediately another writer whose texts are crucial and fundamental to this piece, Leslie Newman, whose wonderful book, October Morning, many of you may be acquainted with that collection of poems. She was here in Laramie 20 years ago to the day, I believe, and wrote poems in response to what she was experiencing. And so her fence poems are foundational for this piece too, so I just would mention that. I feel like the deeper we travel in this with Matt's story and with our experience singing this song, I sometimes call it a 105-minute long song for Matt, just a long song, or a singing meditation. So I'm one of those people who was from afar. I was living in San Francisco at the time when I learned about what happened on October 26, 20 years ago. And I never met Matthew Shepard, but something in it, what he experienced and the story that unfolded afterwards also just pierced me. And yeah, it's extraordinary that we're here. I feel really kind of wordless in a way today, and I guess I would just start with that, so I might be a little babbly with this particular question if I go on too long, because mostly what I'm feeling is sort of that, you know, with your students, a little bit silent. It feels very grounding to be here. And I mean, I love kind of meeting, you know, the natural elements here, for one thing. You know, this is the American West that is so beautiful, you know, so beautiful. It just is on its own. And then it's also sort of mythically and in all of our American stories so important for beautiful reasons, but also it's given us such strange notions of maleness, you know, and, you know, from John Wayne on down, you know, just this very narrow little strip of what it means to be a man. And so, you know, and I grew up with that like everybody did. But to be here and sort of meet that and think every time I come out to this part of my beloved America, you know, I want to be more fully myself. I don't want to hide anymore. I want to relate to the soil and to the air and to the cattle, horses, sky, and grass, which is the name of one of the movements. And I want to let it know I'm here. And I want to let it know I'm here, that I recognize it too, in its beauty and its strength, and in that the poetic wind that whips around out here. I did have kind of a heart dream that at some point we could be here and sing it. And I mean, it was a little bit selfish, you know, it perhaps because I felt like a part of our journey needed to be here. And the fact that it has happened to the day, October 6th, it's just kind of extraordinary. So I think I'll just leave it at that. It just means so much I can't even really articulate it.
Thank you.
No, you go, Charles.
It's tag team.
She was in charge. I'm much like Craig right now, which is a little stunned and dumbfounded and speechless. And I was, as we drove here a day and a half ago or so, getting closer and closer to here, and even landing in Denver, all you see is prairie, you know, and that immediately spoke to me. And as we came closer to Laramie, it was this. There was this draw, and it was calling me like a beacon. And the closer I got, the more anxious I got. The more, and for the first time, I think as an adult, I wasn't really able to explain how I felt. I felt like a 3-year-old having a tantrum, and you ask what's wrong, and they can't tell you. They can't actually articulate it. It's hard for me to articulate right now. There's just a lot of energy coming from a lot of different places. It's important for me to be here, similar to what one of our singers and colleagues said yesterday, which was that he feels like he's singing this piece for the first time. To be here, and I think, you know, I speak for all of us when I say it's a little daunting that this is brand new for us tonight. And I think that it is so important that we continue to celebrate Matthew and to also honor Matthew for what his death has created in our nation and in the world today. I also, I think that it's important to recognize Russell and Aaron as they were, I think, results of an environment where you're taught at an early age that these types of people are less than. And I think that's something that we have to continue to be conscious of. How are we teaching our children as they grow? What are we modeling for them? Am I teaching my son to treat this person, or daughter to treat this person this way because of the way they've seen me behave? So I think it puts a lot of responsibility on us and those of us who are, well, not just in the care of children. I don't have any. I have nieces and nephews, and I love them as much as their mothers do, honestly. But we all have young people in our lives. They watch us in grocery stores. They're at the malls. They're watching adults. And if we aren't treating each other with care and love and respect, why should they? I think that it's also important to continue to reiterate how tragedy, as unfortunate as it is, and how painful it is, and as ugly as it can create such beauty. The reactions of people who come to hear this work is stunning to me. I've seen it from the outside. I felt it from the stage. There is something happening here because our dear friend here allowed himself to be a vessel and, you know, create this masterwork that is actually speaking to not just people here in the United States, but across the globe. So I'm just honored to be here at this time, and I just want to honor him and to honor the LGBTQ community and the growth that is happening. It might be slow, but it's steady. Slow and steady is better than speeding along and then an abrupt stop. So we have to stay the course.
Thank you. Jason.
I guess it was a 50-50 deal there. So, my apologies for the preponderance of taciturn Norwegian intellectuals up here. You're really in for a treat today. Turns out we didn't grow up that far apart, and our great-great-grandparents in Norway didn't grow up that far apart either. And to find ourselves sitting on panel discussions all over creation over the last couple of years has been a wonderful family reunion of a sort. So I'm the non-musician, non-poet, listener, observer up here. About 5 years ago, when our offices were still in the walk-up above the Mexican restaurant on Blake Street with no fire suppression system and really bad plumbing, I got this call from Austin, Texas, from this very creative, intellectual, deep-thinking artist who had this crazy idea to do a big musical interpretation of Matt's story and what it all meant. And I get a lot of calls like this, I mean, not every day, but a surprising number of calls and emails from people who are sculptors, poets, painters, writers, every form and fashion of the arts. We just got a plaster bust of Matt in the mail from a lady in Germany last Thursday, completely unexpected, wrapped in blankets and bubble wrap. So this phenomenon of Matt's story arresting people's attention and demanding they interpret the feelings and the thoughts that they have experienced around this story for 2 decades is universal. Luckily for all of us, only a very few people are actually very good artists. And what we end up seeing is profoundly moving stuff from people we never knew about, who were struck by these events and carried them around for a long time and knew there was some place out there where they were fully revealed and spent their time and effort getting there. And that's what Craig and his collaborators did. An initial vision arose. I think Craig always knew that the finished work was out there somewhere and that he could find it. And he set out talking to people who knew Matt, his family, his friends, the guy above the Mexican restaurant, and it grew. And he gathered a flock about him of people who shared that vision, who made it feasible, who made it fundable, who made it challenging, who gave it an audience, who gave it form. And y'all are hearing an awful lot about how astonishing this piece is. I hope, dear Lord, please come tonight and hear it. We're actually not kidding. I mean, we're all really proud of ourselves up here, obviously, but we're immensely proud of him for what he achieved in making it matter, and for it to be, coming back to your question, happening here. Where else could it happen tonight, really? Where else would it happen? Besides Fort Collins tomorrow night, if you have a scheduled conflict tonight, head down the road. Before government, before religion, before the marketplace, what we had were close-knit clan relationships bound by storytelling, a shared history, our folklore, if you will, our urban legends today. All of these are elements of our desire to define who we are by a shared set of experiences. And millions of people share a set of experiences around Matt's life and his death. And what Craig has done is to give us back that story in a new and revealing way, so that we can share it and maintain the bonds that those terrible events created amongst us. So it's entirely fitting that it's occurring here, and I'm so grateful so many of you share that feeling. I get a lot of people contact us and say, I need to go to Laramie. I'm going to go to Laramie. I'm going to Laramie. Where should I go? What's it like in Laramie? And I'm like, well, you know how the McDonald's have been redoing themselves all over the country? Laramie's got one now. Like, for those of us who are from Wyoming and who experience these places as everybody's got to be from somewhere, right? I think it's a little surprising to us often just how deeply meaningful it is for people who haven't been here to come here and know that they're sharing a time and place with those to whom this story was so meaningful. And I want to thank all of you for making them feel so welcome for so many years, so many people who have come here looking to better understand what happened and why they felt the way they did about it. This community has been magnanimous and friendly and welcoming. And I think it's because of a lot of the individual people I see in front of me here that has been true, and I think it's been very true for this group this week as well.
Thank you. Michael, why is it important for you to be here?
It's extraordinary to be here. I was here about 5 years ago. I had been out at an art center, Brush Creek, west of here. Tried to find the fence, spent the night, but I had just ideas about Laramie. But this morning I feel that we've heard the heart of Laramie. And that gives me huge hope to hear your extraordinary sheriff say the things he said about his own journey, his own personal transformation, and Matt's friends and distinguished people who work in this area of helping others. A lot of spiritual traditions talk about going from the mind into the heart, and heart is a word that Craig uses so often. Sufis, in a good sense, Sufis say take the mind and pound it down into the heart. I just want to say, last night at the Dress, I listened and watched, and I've been there since the premiere over 2 years ago, and it was quite different for me. I've always loved it passionately, but last night I wept through most of it. And I talked to my wife briefly on the phone, who was supposed to come with me but got a little sick, and she said, "Do you think it was like that because you're in Laramie?" I said, "Oh yes, oh yes. It is what Craig calls sacred ground." And the sense of hope I feel from hearing what you spoke about today and what the sheriff spoke about. You know, James Baldwin, the great American writer, says, "You cannot tell the children there is no hope." And this wonderful work that Craig has composed is very much about that arc, that transformational arc from the lead, as it were, to the gold. This work is gold. I can't tell you what it means to be here. I'm trying to, but stumbling. Wonderful welcome from Nicole. Wonderful student drivers. It means I wouldn't have missed it. I wouldn't have missed being here this morning. So I'm just deeply grateful to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. It's impactful, I feel, for all of you to be here. So in the creation of any major work of art, there is an inspiration and an impetus. But in a musical or vocal work, usually the text comes first. Craig mentioned Leslie Newman's book, October Morning, from which about half of the texts come from, third to half, yeah. And, but then there's this wonderful body of text that was largely a collaboration between Craig and Michael. And so would you both talk a little bit about maybe how you chose the variety of texts in Considering Matthew Shepard, and then a little bit about your collaboration?
Sure. Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge it every second, you know, as the beauty of just being here in a room with all of you. It just feels like there's such a common spirit. It's quite beautiful. I waited a long time, and Jason kind of referenced that a little bit obliquely in what he was sharing, that I felt right after what happened in 1998, I had this feeling I wanted to respond to this. I had to. And then it wasn't until 2012 that I really thought, you know, this isn't going to leave me. It's still staying with me. And I was kind of terrified. I kind of feel like I'm just going to talk in a maybe different way than I have ever before, just because we're in Laramie and this is very sacred family even. Because I don't think I realized the extent to which my needing to do this was also personal. As a gay man, and I was a young gay kid who grew up in northern Minnesota in a mining town, and sort of, you know, maleness was sort of getting drunk and shooting things a lot, and I'm not anti-hunting, I don't mean that, but I'm just like, that was sort of the thing. And I also grew up pretty early on kind of doing a whole string of time with conversion and aversion therapy. So that was a part of mine. So it's kind of really drilled into me about sort of, certainly you are not enough as you were originally created, you know. And I certainly hadn't buried that. I had worked my entire life in healing this, and was really a big part of my life and journey. And I'm now strangely, you know, beautifully grateful for it too. But I learned in the beginning of this process, just over day by day, how important this was to me to take this journey. Because Matt's story kind of represented the extreme manifestation of all the daily fears of just walking in, and for any of us kind of feeling less than, and when someone diminishes another as just with a comment or a look or a rolled eye or just whatever it says culturally that, you know, you're not enough. And yeah, I just dove in, like, I would say in a lot of, I felt the compelling force, like this thing wants to come through. And then also kind of an equal dose of fear. And so every step along the way, I kind of had to protect it. Like I said to my colleagues at Conspirare, we have to put a stake in the ground. I've got to do this thing, but we're going to call it a workshop. Because, you know, you can create something that's bad in a workshop and you have cover, you know. It's like, it's just a workshop. And so I dove in that way, and of course then early on encountered Leslie's extraordinary poems, which I had been really thinking about the fence a lot, and thinking and wondering how can that fence speak. So those were kind of early seeds for me, and it's like one of those things, an impulse that suddenly leads you to something that already exists. And I found these extraordinary poems, and I thought, oh, this can be structural. And I was going to write a passion, you know, in the old kind of way we talk about passion, passio, and meaning, suffering, story. And the great passions of Bach were very important to me, St. Matthew Passion, St. John. I was conducting those a lot. And so I thought, this is what I want to somehow pay tribute in this kind of classical form. Not Matthew Shepard Passion. So that workshop was really kind of about the passion story, I would say, sort of that suffering story. After that experience, which was really powerful, but felt also only annihilating, you know, just we were all walking out in the parking lot, just sort of on stun, and I thought, you know, I think I need to do something more than this, than just sort of a retelling of this and a re-experiencing of the grief. And I got some real glimpses. I got great help from Judy and Dennis, just as they spoke about Matt so frequently without calling him Matthew most of the time. And I thought, you know, Matthew's in this piece, but Matt is not. And so I thought epilogue, I created an epilogue, ultimately this is where Michael comes in, sort of about maybe 10 months after that workshop. And then we had committed to the premiere performance, which was, you know, in 2016. And I was starting to feel the burn and the panic. Like, this thing's, okay, yeah, I feel the vision of it, but there ain't anything on paper. And so Michael stepped in as this royal friend. And I know of his many amazing musical works. He knows how to create words for sort of the boats of music, you know, so that the ships can sail and find their way. And yeah, and we burrowed in, and I'm afraid it was a very sort of long distance. You know, he was in Minneapolis, I was in Austin. Very fiery and intense, and, you know, probably even inappropriate in terms of what I asked from him sometimes. And I probably would let him speak a little now, but but it was glorious, and he was right in there with me. I had the gut feelings, and then I just needed his reflection, not only the beautiful words, but his reflection back of confidence, like, yes, this is. Someone else in the room was a real gift to me. Robert Keir was a beautiful sort of spiritual presence and personal friend in that process, a wonderful composer who took me on a beautiful shamanic journey once, deep over the phone, if you don't mind my share. It was a beautiful moment where I was so in the pits of, like, this is not going to happen. You know, people are buying tickets for this non-event, so we just got to cancel it right now. And he stepped in royally there too. So anyway, I think I'm in that jabber mode right now, so I'm going to say, Michael, why don't you say a few things about partnership?
Craig called me a few months after the workshop presentation and said, would you mind entering this mess? So he sent me these audio tapes and said, what do you think? And I said, when I taught for 45 years poetry, and I said, well, with student poems, I'd say about Stephanie's poem, where's your pleasure, where's your pain? What's the strength of this piece? And what maybe is keeping it from being more fully itself? And I think I said to him, it was very consistently elegiac. We needed, good writing always works through contrast, you need more contrast. I said, I don't know who else said this to him, Judy Shepard's book, we've got to get Matt's journal material into there, the thing with the mailboxes, and let's bring Matt to life. That was a color that was not on the palette quite. it was extraordinary to get these audio tapes from my little writing shed in my backyard and say, I need this by, yesterday. One little anecdote, he sent me the tape of the final piece, which is called All of Us, which is incredibly rousing, kind of gospel-like chorus, and you'll hear some of your student singers from Laramie joining in at the end. And he sent it to me, and I wrote a draft of something. He didn't like that. He's not always, immediately accepting what I'm happy to say what I write. And then I said to him, I'm not a musician. It's a little fast for me. I was raised by a wonderful musician, but I need it a little slower. So there's this wonderful piano intro to All of Us. It goes, dum, da, 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 dum, and then the piece starts, da, 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 dum. I said, could you slow it down? So he sent me a tape, da, 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 got it. And it was just an extraordinary thing. I did a lot of writing with Stephen Paulus over 40 years, so I was somewhat experienced, but to be sent this music and to try to be worthy of it, it was extraordinary. It wasn't always like that. He said, I want this piece called Keep It Away From Me. And he sent me a little blues riff. And then I just was alone with that. And that's an awesome responsibility and a challenge and a joy to be the person who puts words to this incredible music. Because if you do it right, it'll be for the ages. And with the blues thing, I don't know if you change. I mean, I'm not a musician. I just wrote these words, and you think you said every syllable. Extraordinary. So we've become like brothers. It's a wonderful improvisational, loving energy between us, and changed my life. I just say this: Stephen Paulus, I love. The 4th anniversary of his death will be October the 19th. There's no replacing in my heart Stephen Paulus, but with Craig, it's being lifted by a whole new wave. It's extraordinary. I can't believe how lucky I am.
It would. And he was so receptive always. I mean, he really taught me so much about true partnership. And again, all of this was just, to get to do that with another man. We're also taught to be these separate entities, protective. This is my turf, this is my ego, this is what I do. And he was so extraordinary in sort of partnership and also being willing to say, these are my words, take them, throw out, use what you will, and then send me what you're using and I'll go from there, and just extraordinarily free. I mean, the whole thing was laced with it. Robert Kierso often uses the term of co-creation. Yeah, I mean, again, we have to all do this, but we men really need to learn how to work this out and to breathe together and live together. We've got to get this while we're still here on the planet. But I love that receptivity, and I just want to say one word about sort of the what we experience too. I come today to Laramie sort of. I always have to kind of find a little chip that I'm not usually carrying around and kind of put it in my little headphone here, my brain, and go, oh yeah, you wrote this. I mean, whatever that is. But because mostly I love to come on the road now as a performer. These are my beautiful colleagues that are just like inspired. And this was really written for them. Many of them are singing original roles that were for them. And so that makes it really, really special. And the ensemble things are for them. Because I know they'll do things that are so broad stylistically. And they do it without a whiff of anything but readiness and openness. But the whole piece about something speaking in this, and there kind of feels, I am speaking as a performer now, but there's kind of an aliveness here that I feel when we perform too. And I keep being kind of nervous, like knowing my name's attached to it somehow, that when will we get bored and kind of sort of almost tired of, okay, we've done it, and now it's just a show that keeps repeating. And there's this aliveness. And what I know is that first I have been of this sort of commitment of sort of, those 5 hard truths that some of the Zuni traditions come in. Richard Rohr talks about them a lot, but one of the 5 hard truths is your life is not about you. I just kind of began this, and every single day when I just did a heart prayer, kind of on my knees too, to say, just, use me here, really, life, spirit, divine, God. The bundle of little insecurities that I was as a composer, all kind of nurtured in a way by being a young gay kid who never felt. I mean, it all kind of works together in the end. And sort of, I said, yeah, I've got to move forward with this. I do, and I don't always know how, and I'm afraid to. And yet, but just to say, okay, all of that, blah, 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 I just want to lay myself open. And then I feel like every single person who stepped up to this project, Leslie, everybody, Ann McNair, who leads it, the singers, Nicole, you and your participation, the way Jason enters into every dialogue we have. I mean, it's just, there's this sense of, there's something so much bigger that we're all really interested in. You know, the dance of that ecstasy and joy, which is really our life, not the minuscule pieces of what's mine, what's not, you know, who am I, where have I succeeded. All the stories of ourselves are only useful until we're really able to release them and realize that this bigger story is where the real joy is. And so I just feel like it's really contagious, and people get it, and that was the spirit of this, so yeah.
Lovely. So Craig, you just mentioned some spirituality, and I would love for each of you to just touch on, the reason I ask this question is I was reading through the libretto, and I think there's only one mention of God, but yet, and this is the line, it says, I am dying in these cold hours for the resplendent glance of God. And that's a beautiful line. And even though I think there is only one mention of God, it seems like a very spiritual piece, but a very honest and real piece. So there's this element of groundedness, but also what is out in the universe that we can learn from this? Anyone?
Norwegian?
I think there is so much out there spiritually that I grew up in a place where there was only one thing spiritually to pay attention to and to worship, and that was the only way, you know, to salvation. I've since grown, and it's been a journey, and I'm not through that spiritual journey yet. But the most important thing to me with regard to that is spirit. That's the one thing all of us have, and I don't think that it's necessary to have religion to be a good spirit. I think that there are many things at work that we can't see. I think our tiny little minds cannot fathom all that is actually at work and at play. It can be God, it can be Buddha, it could be Mother Earth, whatever it is that you're calling it. It could be the universe. Things are at work. And I don't think you have to be boxed in to one way of belief. I studied a bit of world religion when I was an undergraduate, and one of the things that I found consistent through all of them was to show kindness, show love, show respect for your fellow man. And those don't seem to be the things that we go to. We just dig into the fact that, you know, our doctrines are different, but what's the same? What is it that actually is the same, and why don't those things actually make more sense to you than these other negative components? I think I love the openness of that piece for that, because like I said, a healer, a spiritual leader, whatever created this earth that we dwell in, whether it was, you know, a huge explosion and this organized itself, this piece leaves an opening for that. So anyone can reach out and pull this piece and find their spiritual way without feeling as if they are being boxed into a certain sect of religion.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Go ahead, Jason.
I think what Craig was saying about co-creation just a few minutes ago, the spiritual element of this piece is evident in its origins. It was put together with an organizing principle by a group of very different people from very different walks of life who each brought little pieces of a story together about yet another person who lived once here. And it's very appropriate that this work was co-created because the story of Matthew Shepard was co-created. It exists as a historical artifact and lesson because we created it. Millions of people were touched by his death. Thousands of them sent gifts. An organization was built. History was written. Legislation was passed. You cannot number the people who were involved in the co-creation of that story. And in turn, the co-creation of Matthew Shepard's story is a tiny instance of the co-creation of the world we live in, the society we live in, that we all get up every day and co-create in our small parts. And the way we think about the work we do at the foundation, legislation would be great. Yes, Wall Street's pushing companies to be more inclusive. Yes, schools have better policies. But we will co-create the future without hate by the millions individually deciding to do so. And if we could manage to do it in tandem, it could happen in a day, free of charge. Everyone would feel better. Dennis and Judy could retire and go see art museums. I could go back to working on sage grouse habitat, which I think you all know is really a problem situation. And we could achieve it. And it's not naive to ask for that because it's the only way that will actually work. And whatever your spiritual tradition, traditional, Christian, Eastern, atheist, I think everyone has to believe the evidence in front of their own eyes that we create the world we live in for ourselves in small part and in whole.
Beautifully said.
There's a phrase, comes from Yeats, I think, the great Irish poet, man, woman. Man can embody truth, but he cannot know it. Which means you have to live your witness in life. And God doesn't need to be mentioned if what you're doing comes from the very roots of the heart, which is where I believe God lives. So we don't need to use the word God in this piece because it's a loving piece, it's a compassionate piece. It pours out its compassion upon this terrible, terrible wound. And so I think it is a highly spiritual piece without having the name mentioned but once. And you mentioned the word kind. One of my favorite quotes is, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle." And that's how Craig intuitively entered into this incredibly challenged prospect of writing this work. I'd like to send him a quote every so often from Henry Moore, the English sculptor, who said once, "It's important in life to have a passion, something you won't let you go. And the other thing is, you cannot possibly achieve it." That kind of paradox is helpful to both of us, I think, as we knew we couldn't do this, but must. Love is the imperative. Behind the word love, there is the divine, I believe. But the word love is the imperative, the heart.
You asked just about, well, I'll just respond to your question through the spiritual aspect. Just had to be the biggest tent possible. You know, I mean, this piece, there's, in 100 minutes, you can't touch on every musical style, but there are enough musical styles represented that people get the point. That it was very intentional that there's a broad spectrum of styles here, because it was so sort of shocking to me, you know, going to conservatory and graduate schools in music to say, oh wow, these delineations we make just permeate everything we do, and you know, even this sounds like such a simple distinction of music that's sacred or music that's secular, but it bothered me that really intelligent people, you know, leaders in critical thinking were using the word sacred so only to mean often just that which comes from a church or ecclesiastical tradition or liturgical, and I thought this is really a misuse of that word. And then kind of the hierarchies we have even within music. You know, my music is better than your music, and you know, we really find that in a lot of classical musical circles. It's still, you know, present a lot. And I bumped up into some of that here with this piece, because there are people, you know, purists who like don't mix this, you know, barroom music with my, you know, classical polyphony or whatever the case may be, and that really bothered me, because the only, you know, God is only God if it's an expanding God, you know, that includes all, and so that's just meant to be a really broad tense or the picture of that musically too. And I think people get it right away if you're open to it, but that's what we wanted to leave that heart open for.
It's beautiful, thank you. Because we have about 14 minutes left, I'd like to do 2 speed rounds. And then we'll have a few minutes for audience questions. So the first speed round, and we'll just go down the line. The first question, and you must say in one nugget, one sentence, one line.
We are hearing you. I sat in the wrong seat. I knew it.
It's all you,
I
Charles.
knew it.
The first question in the speed round. Are you ready? Charles.
Maybe.
What do you hope for the audience's experience tonight?
I hope for the audience to, to feel the myriad of emotions from beginning to end that we go through every single time that we do this. I want for the audience to feel the humanity that exists within this piece.
Lovely. One point. Craig.
I just hope that people will have an experience, be open to being in their bodies and having an experience.
Excellent. 1 point. Jason.
I would like for people to float out of this performance tonight on the hope and courage that the piece embodies, so that they will go tomorrow and the next day and do great works for all of us due to the inspiration they felt.
Wonderful. Another point. Michael.
People to be open the way I felt last night, opened in an extraordinary new way to the work I love and know quite well from the experience of being in this community. So to be opened and to go forth and to initiate change, not just to, say thoughts and prayers, but action. And I was so excited by hearing what's going on in this community.
Thank you, Michael. 1 point. And this is a question that I've been asking various Conspirare artists as we went through yesterday's rehearsal. And I'll give you about 20 seconds to think before we go down the line. I know it's hard. I think Michael already has the answer. I asked him yesterday. But what is the one line of text in the piece that is pivotal for you, or that crystallizes the message of Considering Matthew Shepard? Okay, Craig, go for it.
From the Bengali poet Tagore, once we dreamt that we were strangers, we wake up to find that we were dear to each other.
Mm.
Beautiful.
So many things.
Michael.
Yeah, we talked a little bit, so I wasn't cheating exactly. She didn't give me the questions ahead, but I love the quote that Craig gave from Tagore, and I thought after the performance last night, the dress, I said to Nicole, these are my own words, forgive me, but at one point, in all of us, you're people born to dream, and it seems to me that the imagination is our birthright. We were designed to dream and to imagine. And so much in life represses that, crushes that, contracts that. Mm-hmm. And so our action is not only community action, but to dream new works. What's that phrase? Mm-hmm. Don't mourn after the Salvadoran martyrs. Don't mourn them. Imitate their lives. Mm. Be them. Be them.
Thank you. Beautiful. Jason or Charles?
We tell each other stories so that we will remember.
I have two, but they're very short.
Okay, go for it.
The simple word all, community, all of us together can create change. And then only in the love can we do that. And those are my 2 lines.
I love that so much. We have about 8 minutes for questions. So if you have a question for Conspirare artists, additional artists are here in the audience, as well as benefactors and supporters of Conspirare. If you have questions about the genesis of the work, comments about what you might experience. Paul.
I'd like to know why 2012? I mean, if you think of the Laramie project, it was immediate. I mean, they were here interviewing us before we even understood what was going on. This is 14, 15 years later. What does that time frame add or allow you to do that earlier works couldn't do?
I think it just, for me, took that time. I feel like I've been a slow burn in most of my life, just because, trying to learn how to blossom and open up and be confident to do something. I've had a lot of impulses. Maybe we all feel that, some regret, like, oh, I could have done this had I not felt so much fear. And I think I just was starting to feel the force was compelling enough to say I'm willing now to walk through those fears. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So when creating a piece of art like this, there's lots of iterations and changes and deviations and everything. How did you, was there a moment where you felt like this is ready? And how did it come to being the final version?
Yeah, that's a great question, and yeah, it goes through so many iterations, and we're still kind of iterating. Yeah. Let's see, concise response. Right up to the premiere, I'm looking at some beautiful singers here too, and when I sent what we thought was kind of final to them, it's so quiet. And usually if they receive music like they do a month or two before, we'll hear a few things like, oh, this is a cool piece. And I just heard nothing. Like, it was just like radio silence. And I thought, oh my God, they all just hate it. And so I had this feeling of, this is so not ever ready, and let's just get through this premiere, and then I'll kind of find my dignity again. I'll take a vacation for a while, and, if the part that is all ego worried. But they were just all worried because they had to memorize it. So they were totally in silence because they were very busy. So, but it felt like even that night before the premiere, you think that was a finished product, but everything was just going wrong at the dress rehearsal, and the sound was just cracking and popping, and the lights, just so many things were funky, and the piece too. So, but I would say that night that we first sang it together and played it together, it felt like, oh wow, there's a completeness here. I feel like it had, it's in the doing, in the living. It's not on paper that anything feels finished. It's in the living and then the inhabiting of it. So I do feel like, the basic thing was there at the premiere, and then we've done lots of tweaks, and I've, like writers say a lot, kill your darlings. I had a little darling that I loved, but it felt like it was redundant, so it was a movement I took out. It's still available for, separate use, but so those kinds of things. So it's been a journey. And then in terms of the whole production, which has had different images and different staging or non-staging, that's been a very different journey. So, but the piece itself, this is the first, it's just like 2 weeks out that we've seen this. So that's kind of crazy pants. Yeah.
Robert.
Well, one of the key words in this entire piece is thank you, and you'll experience a movement that is based on a W.S. Merwin poem, a phenomenal poem that is read while some incredible music is unfolding. But I'd like to say thank you, because for those of you who perhaps you don't know artists, meaning Craig as a composer and the incredible singers that are here and amazing poet of Michael Dennis Browne, and everybody else who is part of all of us and is co-creating this work, the amount of self-sacrifice that it takes and the amount of releasing the ego and just giving from the place of compassion and love and the truth of what's in this story as it ennobles us to do things and to change in a way that's significant. That's being initiated by every single person who's involved. First, I want to acknowledge Craig, incredible journey It's through your journey, co-creating with Matthew, that this happens, with Matt. And every time we hear it, we're closer to him, he's closer to us, and the truth of what it is more apparent and alive in us and inspiring us to change. But that goes for every single person who is involved. I'd like to acknowledge the singers who are incredible human beings. Every time you come into this production and give so much, knowing you as I do, I feel the presence of your own being in and through the piece. You've given that opportunity. And to everyone else, I think of Fran and Larry, who commissioned the piece. I think of Ann McNair, who's indispensable in so many ways. And I think of all the production people who are working so hard and late at night and early in the morning. That's what co-creation is, and that's at the heart of the endeavor, and what will carry it forward through change, the change that we're seeing come about in our country through the challenges that we have. Those challenges are blessings that give us the opportunity to be fully realized, and this piece is the inspiration that enables us to do it.
We have time for one very quick comment from Ann McNair, Managing Director of Conspirare.
We have taken this piece all over the country, and one of our visions was that we would have a national conversation. And Robert mentioned co-creation, Craig mentioned co-creation, but we truly bring the community with us everywhere we go. Like each time we come, that community, that experience, it really does travel with us. And our beautiful singers are from all over the country. And so I said at the beginning, please make sure you promote the show. We really and truly want to have this experience with you. The school here, Laramie High School, has been incredible. Mike Cansey is amazing. Nicole and her team at the University of Wyoming, the piece has grown as much as people would like it to be the same every time we do it. It can never be the same because as we do, it grows and evolves with each experience, with each story we hear. So it is a genuine invitation from us to you to please come, to please tell your friends, and let's have every single seat in that auditorium filled tonight, because this piece has the power to really change the world. I believe it with my heart. So my mom was babysitting my 10-year-old for 2 weeks. So please do come and join us. It is a very genuine invitation from all of us. And really a huge thanks to Nicole and Mike and the entire team.